start? Are you ready?
So when you're ready to play
Okay.
the video, she'll play that.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back to it.
Great, let's get started. So good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and tiger friends. I know there are jaguar friends as well amongst the audience. But welcome to this event, Asia's Landscape Guardians, investing in tiger recovery to reach global biodiversity and climate goals. My name is Midori Paxton, and I'm the Global Director for Nature at the United Nations Development Program. And it's really my honor to moderate this panel session, which promises to be highly stimulating and thought-provoking. So this session was put together by the Tiger Conservation Coalition, comprising 9 NGOs, I think the logos are there, and UNDP, and in collaboration with the GEF-financed World Bank-led Global Wildlife Program. So last April, the Tiger Conservation Coalition organized the first tiger financing global conference, and graciously hosted by the Royal Government of Bhutan, under the patronage of Her Majesty, the Queen of Bhutan. We'll show you some summary video afterwards. And there, with the tiger range countries, we collectively issued the Paro statement, because the conference was in Paro, and committing ourselves to work together to mobilize additional $1 billion to conserve tigers and tiger landscapes over the next 10 years, of course working with a range of public and private partners. And already we are making progress. Extensive consultations have taken place with tiger range countries, and also we have been able to mobilize some new resources towards creation of the Tiger Landscape Investment Fund, a blended financing mechanism aimed at catalyzing nature-positive businesses in tiger range countries that can help mitigate the threats to tiger and tiger habitats. So far we have secured financial support from the Nature Investment Facility. Actually, there's another event going on this now, which we established with UN Capital Development Fund and UNESCO, with Cartier Nature as the founding donor. And also, Government of Germany has confirmed its contribution to pilot the mechanism in Malaysia, Thailand, and hopefully in Bhutan and other countries as well. So we know that there is biodiversity finance gap of at least $700 billion per year, and we know that much of this gap needs to be filled by private finance, in addition to, of course, increased public financing for nature. And at the same time, an enormous amount of nature negative finance is flowing. We heard about 7 trillion figure from UNEP, including government subsidies that are harmful for nature and people as well. So there's a dire need for shifting the flows of finance from nature negative towards nature positive. And we need to go beyond project financing. We are supporting, from our side, 132 countries to develop and implement National Biodiversity Finance Plan. And this is a plan to finance the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or NBSAPs, including, which should include, obviously, tiger conservation as well. And if you think about, global GDP of 100 trillion and 7 trillion nature negative finance, what we are talking about, even 1 billion or 700 billion, is actually quite minute, right? And if we cannot even finance tiger landscape conservation and conserve one of the most iconic, charismatic species on the planet, I would say, what can we achieve in this world of so many multiple crises? So we know very well, without nature, there's no sustainable development, no chance of achieving the climate goals or SDGs, no tiger, no sustainable development, because tiger is an icon and indicator of sustainable development. And that is why UNDP, as a development agency, is committed to doing our part for a collective endeavor of saving tiger and tiger landscape for all of us and for, of course, future generations. Thank you. So now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Hannah Fairbank to provide her remarks. Hannah is a senior biodiversity specialist and the Asia regional coordinator at the GEF Secretariat. And she has been the tiger woman of the GEF for many years. And thank you very much for also hosting this event at this beautiful GEF pavilion. And they have the best coffee too. I tried this coffee, it's the best.
Thank you so much, Midori, and thank you to the Tiger Conservation Coalition partners for hosting this event, and welcome to the GEF Partnership Pavilion. If you're wondering what the partnership is, it's the GEF Secretariat's partnership with conservation trust funds and the three networks of trust funds, conservation trust funds, and you can see those on the wall. So we're very happy. This is our casa is your casa here. So absolutely, they will be cutting off coffee during the events. So right afterwards, you're welcome to go out and get some. So many of you are familiar with the role of the GEF, but we were created on the eve of the Rio Earth Summit to provide financing and technical and capacity support for countries to be able to meet their big commitments under the Rio Conventions and now a broader swath of multilateral environmental agreements. We work through both grants and now blended finance. I'll talk a little bit more about how flexible we are, particularly given the demand-driven nature of the GEF and some of the blended finance work we have. But GEF has a significant and very long-standing financial support for tigers. And as you can see up here on the screen, we work with the Global Wildlife Program, which is a GEF-supported, World Bank-led partnership of 38 countries, $360 million with really significant co-finance, over $1 billion in co-finance, $2 billion? $2 billion in co-finance, thank you. That's really significant in co-finance investment that we've unlocked. We're working with 7 tiger range states, so clearly the Global Wildlife Program is standing in strong partnership with tiger conservation throughout the range. So some of the activities we're taking on, I mean, the really basics of good protected areas management, landscape level planning, obviously working more in OECMs, coming up with sustainable economic options for people living in tiger landscapes. And the new generation of our investments are focused also on some more kind of boundary issue areas for us, including zoonotic spillover and looking at high-risk interfaces for that, working both with human, livestock, and wildlife communities to reduce that risk. A really new and important emphasis on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. And so that's something we've taken on wholeheartedly. You'll hear some about that work today from the panelists. And then one of my favorites here is really taking behavior change approaches and social science approaches and applying those to these really kind of wicked challenges within the wildlife conservation space beyond human consumption of wildlife and demand for wildlife. So really looking at how we can apply those approaches in a broad way. And we had an excellent event here last week focused on that. I can see some of our partners from Traffic here, so if you're interested in hearing more about that work, please do stay. So the Jeff overall is working much more in an integrated fashion, and I think that's just a recognition that siloed sector-based approaches, we are seeing that that's not going far enough. Actually, the negotiation that I left before I came here is talking all about biodiversity mainstreaming. So it's obviously an iterative relationship between what the community is doing and what's being negotiated, but I think there's real recognition that integration, mainstreaming of these approaches, and working across sectors in a systems-based way is critical. One thing I wanted to highlight about the Global Wildlife Program is also we have a global platform that's really created an amazing community of practice. Some of you may have been involved. If not, we have Lisa Faraway here, who leads the Global Wildlife Program for the World Bank and is a champion also for that knowledge platform. There's something for everybody there. So Midori did a great job, so I'm not going to talk too much about the finance angle here, but I do want to make a couple of comments. So clearly, the GEF is financing and funding tiger conservation and tiger landscape conservation, but it's not only about generating new cash for activities to save tigers. That's important. I'll talk a little bit about the future in terms of where the GEF's going on that, but was anybody in the Target 18 conference yesterday? Yeah, okay, some of you. So I think there were some really compelling speakers there that made the point that basically every country on Earth is currently investing more in destroying nature than protecting and sustaining it. So in order to close the gap for nature finance, we really need to make sure that the left and the right hands are working together. And this is not only an economic issue about incentives, but this is really a governance issue. So it's almost like back to the future here. But we have a situation where we have competing policy portfolios across environment, agriculture, the finance ministries, energy, and just lacking in coherence of decision making. And this is not only a technocratic problem. Early in my career, I just thought if there was the data, we could make a change. That is necessary but insufficient, as I think we have learned here. And so really the politics of this and the governance angles, I think we need to double down and continue to work in more creative ways, really to try to address some of these governance failures, which are acting on tigers and tiger landscapes. So this is a different calculus. So I don't think 10 years ago the GEF thought we would be focusing on harmful subsidies as much as we are. So this is I think a demonstration of how we're leading on this. The other thing I wanted to say is that the GEF is doing our part and will continue to do our part in terms of nature finance for tigers and tiger landscapes. So we're doing this really in two ways. One, we have very clear and strategic investments in helping countries mobilize more resources for conservation and for tigers. So this is explicit as Objective 2 in our strategy for GEF 8, and we're supporting biodiversity finance planning and analysis. We have a huge project finance for permanence, PFP investment. We're no longer doing one-off protected areas projects. This is really about protected areas systems and supporting sustainable finance with those systems. And then new collaborations, with the Conservation Trust Fund, so reinvigorating those partnerships. The GEF started quite a few CTFs historically, and now we're really thinking about creative ways to re-engage those partnerships, funnel more money closer to the ground through CTFs. So my last point really here is the GEF is now really this very dynamic family of funds. It's accessible, it's flexible, the STAR allocations are country demand driven. So when we're looking at the next generation of tiger investments in the GEF, all of you are working with tiger range states, engage with the actors who have the control over those GEF resources and figure out how they can be channeled together with countries and the partners on the ground into tiger conservation. This may be an obvious point, but all of the tiger range states have country allocations for GEF 8, and presuming if the allocation framework stays consistent, will for GEF 9. So it's a real opportunity. That's just the basics of the GEF. There's also GBF. There's the super exciting point that now all of the GEF resources, the GBFF, there's the exciting point that all of the GEF resources now can be used for blended finance. It's not just through this non-grant instrument or the NGI. It's all of the GEF resources. So that's super flexible. That can be used for many different concessional finance approaches, equity, loans, outcome payments for nature bonds, etc. Those finance wonks in the room can probably come up with lots of creative structures for nature, and happy to talk about those. So looking forward, really the GEF is looking to work with, but also much beyond, the executive arm of the government. Right now we work very closely, mostly actually with the environment ministries through the operational focal points, which is a wonderful relationship. We're looking at broadening that relationship to other ministries in the executive branch, but also working at the subnational level. We have lots of ideas how we can partner creatively at the subnational level. And clearly increasing our support and engagement with CSOs, Indigenous peoples, local community, women and youth. And this, from a tiger landscapes and tiger conservation perspective, is really critical. This is not a one sector enterprise. This is really all of us together. So there's lots of exciting opportunity on the horizon. Mutual learning between the jaguar conservation community in Latin America and the tiger conservation and community in Asia. I'm sure you're already making those connections within your organizations and between them, but the GEF will continue and really hopes that we can support that mutual learning. I hear there might be a jaguar meeting next year that may model after the Bhutan meeting, which would be an exciting development. So I have gone on too long, but I'm clearly excited about this group of people, this set of issues, and really interested in hearing from our panelists directly today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for your remarks and support. So we'd like to show the video, as I promised, from Bhutan. Just a short video to show the glimpse of what it was like, the heat and excitement and coalition building. You can press, please. Any sound?
His Majesty and I are delighted to welcome all our guests to Bhutan. We have gathered here today because the tiger, this majestic symbol of grace, wisdom, and strength, needs help.
Tigers represent more than themselves. Tigers represent our forests, our ecosystems. Tigers represent our collective future.
We have a unique opportunity to collaborate in creating nature-positive models of coexistence between us people and nature.
We're always challenged to find enough conservation finance to do the real conservation work on the ground. And that's why we're here together, gathered in Bhutan at this conference, to really engage all the different partners from across the tiger landscapes to come together to pledge $1 billion for tiger landscapes.
Tiger is one of the few species which has not only an ecological value, but also cultural, social, and economical value.
I suspect we're all here not just because of the money. We're all here because of the love of the creatures themselves and what they mean to us. They are a part of our lives, they're a part of our imagination, they're a part of our childhood. It's not just the economic value, and yet we know we need the markets to save them.
No one body has the capacity to undertake everything to save the tiger in the wild.
It's all hands on deck. We want everyone to come together, and we want everyone to come with finances as well as with ideas.
There is no way that we're going to be able to fill a gap by just looking at one kind of a model or another kind of an instrument. It's going to be a blended version of different kinds of instruments and mechanisms.
It is really important to sort of have this mix of solutions. Basically, there is traditional way of doing funding, but there are different instruments that we can use.
Despite the fact that biodiversity continues to be lost, there is at least a very clear ambition and a very clear will to conserve
It's one thing to mobilize the additional financing that we need, but we have to be assured that the resources will be used effectively, efficiently, and equitably. And I'm very impressed with the comments that were made by the range country governments about their commitment to really scale up proven programs that work so we really can attack this problem at scale.
Tiger and their habitat are significant environmentally and economically. The ecosystem services they provide are valued at an estimated $11 trillion per year.
In 150 years, our job has been to slow decline, prevent extinction. That is not an investable proposition. And if we talk about sustainable financing and encouraging the world to invest in tigers, we need to think about the investable proposition.
If we are not able to understand the political process of change, whereby all of our society needs to have the right frameworks, so all public and private investment are 100% aligned with the nature positive goal and the carbon neutrality, we'll never make it. The good news is that there are enough resources there.
We can raise the funds required for all tiger range countries to do the important work of protecting and growing tiger numbers.
Together, we can rewrite the narrative of extinction and loss, and instead create a beautiful story of compassion, resilience, restoration, and reverence for all living beings.
I'm so glad we had a chance to share this video with you today, because you can see what sort of momentum we have managed to create. And you also see today in person some of these champions which you have just seen. So now I'd like to invite the 4 distinguished panelists to come to the stage. Kirsten Schutt, Director General, WWF International. Joe Walston, Executive Vice President for Global Conservation, Wildlife Conservation Society. Karma Schelling, Managing Director, Bhutan Trust Fund for Environmental Conservation. And Michael Bennett, Manager, Market Solutions and Structured Finance, World Bank Treasury. So, I'd like to first invite Kirsten to discuss what role WWF plays in our collective endeavor as a tiger conservation coalition.
Hope you can hear me. Thank you so much, and great to be here, and great to be here again with so many people that love tigers, and I think we spent a great time together over the past many years, but especially in Bhutan. So let me start by saying that just a couple of weeks ago, WWF launched their Living Planet report, which is our flagship report on the status of wildlife in the world. And I've done many of these, and every single time there is the most depressing number that comes out. And this year it was 73% of populations of wildlife living in the wild that have been lost in the past 50 years. So 73% in the past 50 years. It's an incredible number. But what this report did additionally is not just talk about the depletion of wildlife, it also started talking about tipping points for the first time. So we know that over the next 5 years, these 5 years are important. We've got the Global Biodiversity Agreement, we've got the Paris Agreement, we've got the SDGs, we're all talking about 2030. But actually, what's more important is that if we don't step up over the next 5 years, we know that we're going to lose some key places. And the Amazon is one example, our coral reefs are another example, the Arctic, because we're so close to tipping points and we're going to lose them. And what's interesting about tigers is that actually tigers have gone countercurrent. So tigers we've not lost, which is kind of interesting. In fact, tigers have rebounded, and it's interesting to see why that has taken place. And of course, for a large part, it's because of the leadership in the tiger range state countries, but it's also because this species has this incredible power to convene, to bring people together. It inspires people, and it inspires people to do what's right, which is to step up and make a difference for tigers. So, but however, despite the fact that we have received so much attention and paid so much attention to tigers, we're still way out in terms of financing for tigers, which is why we held this conference, of course, in Bhutan. So there's still a massive gap, and so we need to step up over the next years on a couple of things. Of course, we need to increase our investments and our fundraising, which is really, really important, but we need to go beyond, and Hannah, you already mentioned it, we need to go beyond traditional fundraising of governance. You know, we need to go to private sector investments, we need to go to payments for ecosystem services, debt swaps, PFPs, and so forth. But there's two other things that we need to do. The second thing is we need to ensure that it's not just about raising money, and we talked about this in Bhutan. We need to make sure that we do two other things, that the money actually reaches the people who live and work that we're trying to in the places that we're trying to conserve. So making sure that the money is not just raised, but actually reaches local communities, indigenous people, whoever, you know, local farmers, all the people who live in these places. I think that's a really important thing that we need to focus on over the next 5 years. And secondly, is we need to focus on the institutions and the governance structures in those countries to ensure that we can actually absorb the money. There's a lot of money that's being pledged for conservation, but not a lot of money is actually flowing, again, to the places where it needs to go. So setting up institutions, governance structures at a national level and at a local level, all the way down to the communities, is going to be essential over the next years for us as WWF, and I would say for all of us working together. Now, it's no accident that we held this meeting in Bhutan, because of course the government of Bhutan has played such a leadership role when it comes to conservation generally, but especially when it comes to tiger conservation. And I think it was incredibly inspiring to see what the government of Bhutan has been doing over the past years with respect to PFPs. You know, the Tiger Coalition is still incredibly committed to continue working with the government of Bhutan over the next years. To work in Bhutan, to work in the various tiger range states. But I think what's also really cool is to see how we can create a ripple effect and go beyond tigers. And, you know, to look at jaguars, it's already been mentioned, that's, I think, a really big program that we're seeing. How can we expand what we've learned on tigers to other species as well? Because I think there's a lot to be learned, but also a lot to be inspired by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of ensuring that money actually reaches people who are there on the ground, right, doing the work for tiger landscape conservation. So let me now turn to Joe. So WCS has been on the ground in many tiger range countries for decades, and what has been the progress so far, and what more need to be done?
Thanks, Midori. I'm going to not actually only talk about WCS, but try and answer your question across tigers more generally.
Yes.
I think the first thing picking up on the comments that Kirsten made, which was we have got these success stories, but we should be very, very cautious and clear about what success looks like. We have 80% of tigers within 2 countries. We have 90% of tigers within 4 countries. So we've got to be very clear what success looks like. Success is not going to be 5,000 tigers, 6,000 tigers in 2 countries. Success has got to look like the avoidance of extinction and have them rebounding across their range. I've lived in 2 countries where I've actually witnessed the extinction of the tigers in those countries. I'm hopeful those 2 things aren't linked, but I have witnessed extinctions of those 2 in those 2 countries. We have incredible successes, but we continue to have failures. And over the next few years, we are likely and possibly going to lose tigers from more countries. That is a collective failure on our behalf. So let's be clear about what success looks like. Success looks like increasing populations of tigers across their landscapes, across their range. And remember, their range at one point was Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, all the way across and down to Bali. Okay, so we're not going to recover them across all of those areas, but a representative range of tigers in their habitats serving the functions they work. And therefore, our targets have got to be very clear about what success looks like. Secondly, and again, picking up on Kirsten's point, the trajectory of tigers, conservation, tiger is emblematic not just of Asia, tiger is emblematic of conservation. Conservation for most of our time has been the slowing of decline. That's what we do. And tigers for the first time are at the forefront because Asia has been at the forefront of its own rapid development and rapid improvements in economy and livelihoods at the expense of nature, as is the case across the world. Tigers have come through their bottleneck in most places, and so that we are switching from a sector of tiger conservation of one being of slowing declines to a sector of increasing success. Now that is really important. That looks very different. If you want to stop decline of a tiger versus now starting to expand its range. And I choose one example which often goes unheard, but Thailand. During most of my career in Asia, we witnessed Thailand was the case study for how not to do conservation. Lost vast areas of species extinctions and areas, and tigers were just one of them. Thailand is the only site in mainland Southeast Asia where we have increasing and consistent recovery of tigers in their range, in their populations, and their diversification of their populations. And that's because they took the whole scale conservation very seriously, landscape conservation, prey-based conservation, and protection and conservation and working between communities and governments, and they have done that. That now looks incredibly different from some other countries where they are holding on to the last 10, 20, 30 species. So the point of saying that is that we must reframe tiger conservation, as I mentioned in the video, to make it the sector of success. We are not going to get investment in failure. So let's take those investments of success that we have, demonstrate why any investment in tiger conservation, that $1 billion, is an investment in success, not in the prevention of failure. And then use that as a case study to turn around those areas that are still declining. Because many of those places still don't see the success, the pathway to success. So let's use those examples. And then finally, again, as I always do, building on Kirsten, is to go back to the Bhutan example. For most of my career, again, the tiger community. Remember, the tiger community is made up of some of the most powerful, individualistic, very diverse set of countries. This is not true of the jaguar. But if you imagine a species that ranges everywhere from Indonesia to Russia to China to India, that is a difficult group for us to get together collectively and find common agreement. The difference was Bhutan. Bhutan stood up as a friend of everybody's, as a neutral country. And that is one of the ingredients we were missing. We must be more than the sum of our parts. Bhutan helped us be more than the sum of our parts. So the three things I finish with is: one, define success. It must be across Asia, not just parts of Asia. Two, we must use the success we have to invigorate and re-establish a pathway to success for those areas that are not succeeding at the moment for tiger. And three, we must really ask Bhutan to continue their role in leading us and the coalition towards that shared future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. You summed up everything so well. So I would just hand over to Bhutan, invite Karma to make the initial statement.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm so eager to grab the mic with all the glorification of Bhutan. Yes, I'm very, very proud that for Bhutan, we have taken conservation very seriously. But tigers, we bring hope to the world for tiger conservation in the world. But we are a global community. We share the concerns. It's a collective concern. Bhutan is still very concerned about tigers. We have a share of challenges. Personally, I have a long association with tigers. Of course, right now I work for the Bhutan Trust Fund, where my roles is very diverse. We provide funding for many areas. 1995, when I joined conservation as a young officer, the first task I was given was, Karma, you're going to be the national coordinator for tiger program in Bhutan. And I thought to myself, that's quite ironical, because I used to be herding cattle in my village, and I was always reminded to keep our cattle safe from tigers. Tigers are dangerous. They will eat our cattle. And here am I given a job to now protect tigers. So 1995, 96, 97, we conducted our first global tigers program, surveys. And in doing so, although we had a protected area which was close to 40%, we suddenly realized that most of our tigers were actually outside the protected areas. So we fully justified what WWF was trying to promote, a landscape approach to conservation. Bhutan was the classic example why it is important. The species are outside the protected areas. We have to protect them. Immediately, my government, we walk the talk. We have to declare biological corridors to save the tigers. So 96, 97, 98, we do tiger surveys. 1999, my government, the Queen, declares biological corridors as gift to the earth. So that's the commitment Bhutan is doing. Now, over the years, of course, when we did our surveys at that point of time, with my good old friend, I would like to recall him, late Chuck McDougall from WWF, absolutely committed to tiger conservation based in Nepal. We actually counted around 80 tigers in Bhutan. Come 2015, our tiger numbers went up to 103. Come 2024, Bhutan's tigers went up to 131. That's why I'm always proud to say that we will, yes, we bring hope. If we make commitment, if the governments make commitment, there is definitely hope. So, yes, I could go on talking about tigers in Bhutan, but I think it's so important to take Bhutan's example, identify areas where there are tigers and try to protect them. And for Bhutan, the other commitments we have made is we have declared that we will keep 60% forest cover for all times to come. We have declared that we will be a carbon negative country for all times. So all these declarations will just fail if we don't protect the tiger. Because for us, if we protect the tiger, we protect the forest. So for Bhutan, I think the tiger means a lot, both spiritually, culturally, economically. So yes, I'm so proud to be here. And if anybody wants to know more about tigers in Bhutan, I'm around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karma. And it's true, really, tiger brings hope. And thank you for also growing the gift to the earth, the tiger number, and intact habitat. Yes, so now I'd like to turn to Michael. One of the financial instruments I think World Bank is working on is the wildlife bond. So would you like to say a few words on this?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. In this area in the World Bank Treasury.
I think it's off.
Yeah, so in this area in the World Bank Treasury, we are very much inspired by the words of a great American bank robber named Willie Sutton, who, when he was finally captured by the police, they asked him why he robbed banks, and he said, it's because that's where the money is. And that's what we're trying to do in the World Bank Treasury, is design products to support activities like tiger conservation or wildlife conservation that appeal to institutional investors, high-grade fixed income investors who sit on trillions of dollars of money, but who simply cannot, because of their investment guidelines and restrictions, make very small investments in high-risk projects. So, for instance, a large asset manager in the U.S. is unlikely to find a pocket to put a $15 million investment in tiger conservation. However, they can find $15 million to invest in a $200 million bond rated AAA that supports tiger conservation. And so that's the structuring that we're trying to do, is essentially take what would be uninvestable projects, but highly charismatic projects, but simply uninvestable to institutional investors, and put them in a structure that works for them. So we've done that now in what we call the World Bank outcome bonds. We've issued 5 bonds, one of which was for wildlife conservation, focused specifically on the black rhino population in South Africa. But the key to the structure is it's a World Bank bond, principal protected by the World Bank, entitled to a AAA rating as to principal. That's what makes it investable by large fixed income investors. And what we're doing is we're taking a portion of what would otherwise be coupon on that bond, investing that on a project, and having the project in some way pay back that amount over the life of the bond. Now, that payback in wildlife conservation is most obviously seen as is a outcome payment, something like what the Jeff did for us in the rhino bond. But when you look at the picture here, you can see other potential structures, because obviously when you see all the green where the tigers are, you can think about carbon credits as well. And we've been thinking about a structure for countries like Bhutan, where Bhutan has or is undertaking Article 6 negotiations with countries that will pay for the protection of the forest. So why not structure a bond where the payback comes from both the direct protection of the habitat of the tiger through the form of carbon credits, and perhaps pays back a bit more based on success of tiger population growth, which could be paid by an outcome payer. So combinations of revenue sources from tiger habitats could significantly help us structure bonds of this sort that have paybacks that rely somewhat potentially on outcome payers like the Jeff, but also rely on other international players like companies that will buy carbon credits produced by tiger habitat landscapes.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. So, I think we are running out of time a little bit, so let me just ask some few questions to any of the panelists who might want to answer, so that we can reserve some time to hear your questions and contributions. So we talk about also, in CBD Forum, the whole of society approach, whole of government approach, essential to, achieve the GBF target. But I think also I'm hearing that also is needed for tiger conservation as well. I don't know if on conservation and for our 1 billion, the target for the coalition. Yeah. Kirsten?
It's working. Good. Look, I think all these terms, this whole of society and inclusive conservation, locally led conservation, there's a lot of new phrases that are being coined in conservation, but I think the most important thing for me is that this is probably the biggest lesson that we've learned in conservation over the past decades, which is that conservation is everybody's business, right? And whether you're talking about tigers or other species or landscapes. So when we're doing conservation work, we have to get out of the conservation bubble. We have to stop talking just to biologists or people who are in love with nature, because a lot of the people that we need to reach are actually the people who don't get that. And so we need to speak the language of economists, of finance ministers, of the health sector, and making sure that nature becomes relevant. It is relevant. We all know that it's relevant for human health, for psychological well-being, for economics, for finance, but we have to speak the language. So I think that's the first thing. And I know that with Tiger Work, what we're doing is trying to reach all these other ministers, especially the finance ministers, and making sure that we can make the shifts to scale up the tiger conservation. And the second element in this is the fact, which I alluded to before, is the fact that we have to work directly with local communities and indigenous people and farmers, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think we've done a great job as conservationists over the past decades, and it's a big shift that we have to make. We've worked very strongly on protected areas, which is essential, but there is a second barrier that we can put in place at a landscape level, and that's the people who live there. If we put them in charge, and if we make sure that the money we're all talking about actually reaches them, that we set up the institutions so that they can flourish in their conservation and their tiger landscape work, that is a huge opportunity to really scale up the work and to make sure that it becomes sustainable, that it's not just a one-off investment, but that it's sustainable over time, owned by the people who live there.
Right, I couldn't agree more. Unless conservation becomes everybody's business, I don't think we are achieving any of the target. Because if you look at drivers of biodiversity loss, it's not within our community, obviously. It's within the whole of economic and financial system out there. So we need everybody to come on board. So I'm just wondering, when we talk about tiger conservation, we also talk about human-wildlife conflict, right, which is a major issue. So I'm just wondering, in Bhutan or any other countries, how you see that comes into this conservation? How can we make sure that people on the ground are supporting the tiger conservation?
Yeah, thank you. One thing what we must clearly know is we should never disconnect economics and nature. For me, having worked in Bhutan in conservation for quite a long period, we sometimes get criticized in the country that you are doing over-conservation. We are doing over-conservation in Bhutan and we are losing out on economy. So issues like human-wildlife conflict, yes. My belief is that conservation is an economic tool. We cannot have sustainable development, making quick money, boosting the economy without constraining the conservation. So after I left my tiger work, actually, I was strongly inclined towards incentive-based conservation. I want to pursue a career where I can find answers to conserve through economics. So that's when I've taken a very keen liking to things like ecotourism. Yes, conservation doesn't come at a cost. Villages in Bhutan face human-wildlife conflict. Almost every household faces that. That is one of our biggest pressing concerns in the country. Now how do you address that? We cannot address that by removing all the wildlife and say, okay, here we address the wildlife has been removed, because that is going to cause a catastrophe in the future. We have to look at a win-win situation. So a lot of now priority is being given to ecotourism, bird watching, villages. I have stayed in villages where before they fear the tiger. The only reason why they like to have the tiger is because of cultural belief, Buddhist belief, that it is sacred, we have to protect it. Otherwise, we really don't need it because it doesn't give me any economic benefit. After we promote ecotourism, they made to realize that the tourists are coming here. They may not see the tiger, but the very fact they know there's tigers in this forest, they're coming here. And a lot of services are then rendered by local communities. It becomes a win-win. So basically for countries like Bhutan, the next mission I would like to really see is proving that conservation is an economic tool and ecotourism is a way forward. Human-wildlife conflict, a lot of these can be accepted. I wouldn't say completely eradicated. Accepted is the word I would say, through other benefits like ecotourism. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. So also in conservation financing, we always talk about, we need investable projects, right? There are people who want to invest in nature positive project. But what are the sort of barriers and what sort of new models might be emerging which you could share with us or anybody in the audience as well?
So I think also we've got to think beyond just the investable proposition. I do absolutely agree with Kama that we should never underestimate the common things we've always done, like ecotourism, and what it takes. It is, yes, we've seen bad tourism. We can see what it's done when it's unregulated and irresponsible. But to see economies that are so intrinsically linked to its nature conservation through a nature-based economy is a very, very powerful thing. And I think it's too easy to dismiss through some bad examples, those kinds of examples. But let's also not forget some of the bigger drivers. When I was 20, let's say, years old, the first place I visited was Karnataka in southwest India. And I got taken to see these protected areas. And I almost left conservation at that. I almost quit conservation at the time because I saw these wonderful tiny parks, jam-packed full of wildlife, surrounded by a sea of poverty. And I just thought, well, what's the point? What's the future look like? And what does that look like? And again, I don't want to invest my time, my life in just a preservation of a little memory. I came back there 15 years, maybe longer later, and I went to those same areas that not only had Bangalore turned from this sleepy little town into an immense driving engine of economic growth and development, driving enormous poverty reduction in the broader area. And environmentalists say, oh, what a terrible now city and how lovely it was. I only saw progress. I thought, what a fantastic city Bangalore has become. People were being drawn out of the countryside. The kids were being given an opportunity to be not what their father did for the first time in generations. And people were coming off. And then the middle classes, the urban elites of Bangalore, they were the ones now paying for, voting for conservation. They were the ones. When I was 19, tourists look like me. When I went back there, the biggest single market for Nikon wildlife lenses was Bangalore. I cannot think of a better way to express why it's so encouraging to go back. They had to double the tiger numbers, their tiger action plan for the Southwest, double, because they'd already beaten it already. Indian nationals from Bangalore were buying up land, creating conservancies, linking up protected areas, everything we wanted to do. So our job in those areas, so when we talk about economies, yes, we absolutely need to support ecotourism and those other forms, but let us not forget the bigger drivers that are consistent with our other objectives of reduction of poverty, supporting urbanization, and those other profoundly influential scales. Tiger conservation is going to be defined more so in its recovery by these drivers than by WCS or many of us now. In Europe, the recovery or in North America, the recovery of big carnivores in Europe now, our conservationists did our job because we stopped them going extinct. We got them through the worst. The recovery now is happening because of much bigger drivers beyond conservation in Europe and elsewhere. We are not there yet with tiger, which means we've still got to do our job of supporting that. But let us not forget that if we do our job right, there are going to be forces much larger than ourselves pushing for the first time big cat conservation in the right direction.
Excellent. It's very inspiring, and India does inspire me as well. If India, with 1.4, 1.6 billion people, could keep tiger population growing in such a, jam-packed country, although it's a big country as well, it should be possible for other species, jaguar and beyond. Michael, would you like to come in on the question?
I think there is an investor for almost any kind of risk, any kind of project. It's just that when you get to smaller projects, higher risk, the volumes of those investors go down significantly. So that again is why I think a big part of this in terms of mobilizing private capital is coming up with the amalgamated structures where you can get the size and you can get the blended quality to bring down the risk to go, as I said at the beginning, where the money is. Because certainly, there are private equity investors who won't need any of those bells and whistles, but there'll be much smaller volume and much higher rates of return they'll be expecting. So I think, what we're doing in this market is really trying to appeal to higher volumes, lower return expectation investors, and we think that's, one of the solutions.
Thank you, Michael. Now we'd like to hear from you. Any question, any contributions for this discussion, Trevor?
Hello, everybody. I'm Trevor Sandwith from IUCN. I'm the director of the Center for Conservation Action, and Anna and Purba and Lisa and others that are working with all of you asked me to particularly thank you, for our partnership and the work that we can do together. I had a couple of thoughts in response, just to reflect. Kirsten, when we talked about the investments that have been put in over the last 10 years, a lot of those, mobilized by many of you, have been about putting grant funding into local situations. And it's really, if, success story, Joe, of increasing tiger numbers, increased community awareness and engagement, better livelihood opportunities, reduction in human-wildlife conflict. These are great to build on, that narrative to build on. And so plotting, if you like, that success story is so important. And because I have an educational background, I was thinking, well, what are we really learning from? Are we really deriving from that practice the lessons learned that we can put into a scaling up strategy? That's something I think we should have as part of our theory of change. It's just what we do with that info. Then the point I'd like to sort of touch on is this kind of niggling concern that the drivers of habitat destruction and fragmentation and competition with other activities really just continue unabated. And they are being financed at levels of orders of magnitude of what we're talking about here. And so we can mobilize finance for tiger conservation, but if we don't mobilize finance that figures out how to divert, let's say, inappropriate investment in the destruction of habitats and their fragmentation, you know, we're up against a massive problem. So perhaps, you know, just taking this narrative of tigers as a keystone species in the ecosystem and how important that is symbolically and iconically, can't we also think of tigers more as an instrument to mobilize this progress, say, towards sustainable development goals? And maybe just the sort of last point would be, last page. It's so costly to try and fix the problem. We're working with cats in other landscapes and the huge fragmentation, restoration of habitats, connectivity built from scratch, you know, underpasses and overpasses and all the rest of it is just massive compared with the cost of avoiding that loss. And so I would just say maybe we could sort of switch the narrative a little bit and say that the right kind of investment away from the wrong kind of financing could also unlock the potential for livelihoods, for restoration, for water production, for disaster risk reduction, and all the other benefits, you know, tourism, of course, being one of those. So thanks so much for IUCN being part of this group, and I look forward to seeing you at the launch of this 10-year report on the Integrated Tiger Habitat Program tomorrow over at IUCN, 11:30.
Great. Thank you so much, Trevor. I think you kind of summed things up for me. And we have 2 minutes. I don't know if there's any burning hands, burning questions, burning interventions. Yes.
I'm Richard Scobie from Traffic. Joe, in his opening remarks, talked about the challenge of alignment of the very diverse political considerations of the governments in the Asia range countries. The similar challenge faces with the environmental organizations, who can also be independent forces among themselves. And one of the things that is so impressive about the Tiger Conservation Coalition is the fact that 10 of us came together and put aside our egos and really built a joint, truly collaborative program to mobilize the $1 billion in close leadership and partnership with the Tiger Range governments. And I just want to give a particular shout out to WWF, which has been the secretariat of this 10-member conservation coalition, for really making sure we do our best and that the whole is much greater than the individual parts in this case.
Thank you very much, Richard. So, unfortunately, we have come to the time to close this session. So we have heard lots of different keywords, quality of success and money needing to reach communities, local communities, indigenous people, the hope Tiger gives to the world, and the cost. And cost of fixing the issue. So we're not talking about also, you know, mobilizing more money, but also the other side of the coin as well. So with this, I'd like to close this meeting. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, please do join us if you haven't at our Tiger Conservation Coalition. Thank you.